On November 22nd, 2024, Kendrick Lamar dropped his sixth studio album, GNX. As someone who's been publishing papers about Kendrick since To Pimp a Butterfly, I was super excited to do a full album coverage video when I heard that GNX had dropped. After all, I predicted that he'd drop on Thanksgiving, which was a week later than GNX actually came out. I'd already been working on predicting possible themes of the post-Miss Morale, post-Beef Kendrick, and one of those themes was revolution, specifically revolution as it relates to the fundamental tenets of Kendrick's faith, and I was hoping to pre-script a video with predictions about what Kendrick might say along these lines. In fact, I did pre-script a bit of the video about this theme, and some of that script made it into this video. After listening to the album though, I knew I had to scrap the whole album approach immediately and get right to the goods. I had to start with what's unequivocally the best and maybe most important track on the album. Luther. Luther's a sleeper track for a Kendrick album, mostly because it's presenting as a love song akin to Love from Damn, but believe me when I tell you this song hit me incredibly hard from the first moments it played on my very first listen to GNX. And not just because I absolutely no holds barred love Luther Vandross. When it comes to Luther Vandross, there's never too much. This song is interesting for about 10,000 reasons, but let me give you a few off the top before we tear the hood off this Grand National and see what kind of engine it has. Luther's the only song on this album that doesn't have an explicit tag. It's a song for everyone. It's also the song with the richest revolutionary history in its sample. While the sample used by K-Dot on the album is the Cheryl Lynn and Luther Vandross iteration recorded in 1982, that song is itself a cover of a song originally written solely by Marvin Gaye and performed with the legendary Tammy Terrell on their album United in 1967. So yeah, at first glance, Luther's title seems like a reference to Luther Vandross, right? Well sure, but that's just the first layer here. Luther Vandross's suave voice and indomitable career as a romance-centric R&B and soul artist are a cover for the real horsepower beneath this absolutely critical record off GNX. Luther stands for more than just Vandross, but for revolution itself. It ties us directly to the Christian theologist and revolutionary Martin Luther, whose work generated the Protestant Reformation and pushed us into modernity when it comes to religion and sociology, and Martin Luther King Jr., of course, who Kendrick consistently references with every single record he works on. Before we get into the revolutionary nature of Luther, let's look at the lyrics of the cover and compare them quickly to get a sense for how Kendrick has lifted the themes but altered them to make them his own. In both Gaye's and Vandross's version, the message is clear. If this world were mine, I'd place at your feet all that I own. In short, if I had it all, if I had everything, I'd give it all just to have you. A classic Vandrossian sentiment, to be sure. Nothing's worth anything but love, after all. For Kendrick, though, a different sentiment arises completely. If this world were mine, Roman numeral 7, babe, drop it like it's hot. If this world was mine, I'd take your dreams and make them multiply. If this world was mine, I'd take your enemies in front of God, introduce them to that light, hit them strictly with that fire. It's a vibe, do your dance, let them watch. She a fan, he a flop, they just want a kumbaya. Nah. In short, Kendrick is suggesting that she's perfect, represented by the way numerologists read the number 7 throughout the Bible, starting with Genesis and God's creating the world in 7 days. Then he goes on to reference Snoop's Drop It Like It's Hot, which of course lends to the West Coast aesthetic to GNX, but that line is directly connected to his taking her enemies in front of God and hitting them with that fire, i.e., dropping them in hellfire through judgment. The line which follows the first, in my opinion, is a reference to none other than the man himself, Martin Luther King Jr., in taking her dreams and making them multiply. He's referencing the sevenness of the world that would occur if it was his, a kind of perfection where all men are created equally and everyone's seen as equals, except for the enemies of culture, i.e., except for them, except for those who he has to make a choice for. Obviously, this is about Drake and them, but let's just assume that this is about the plural. Fuck everybody. This is really powerful symbolism. And it leads us directly into the major theme found in this track that really elevates it to the next level: religious revolution. As a social philosopher and professor of sociology, something that's continued to stand out to me album after album is Kendrick's dedication to revolution in the real academic sense as well as in the practical hip-hop sense. This relates to his considerations of whether the revolution will or will not be televised or understood, and of course, his heroes from Tupac to Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, and MLK Jr. But it's more than that. Kendrick's work specifically denotes the ways in which revolution relates directly to his faith. The nature of Protestant Christianity, after all, owes the biggest debt to its primary revolutionary, Martin Luther. Without Martin Luther, the father of Lutheranism, and the original pensmith who critiqued the church for its selling of indulgences or tickets to heaven, as well as the idea that the gospel wasn't taught to the people in their native language, but in Latin, by priests who often themselves didn't speak Latin, but were just regurgitating what they themselves had memorized. You can't memorize culture, and you can't regurgitate authenticity. Likewise, Kendrick often critiques the idea of buying one's way into heaven, and also continuously harps on people who don't speak the gospel of the streets in a language they can understand. In fact, these are both criticisms levied at Drake throughout the beef in some capacity. But this video isn't about Drake, at least not in focus, because, well, fuck Drake. Nobody got time for that. It's December now.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
The point I'm making here is that while Kendrick doesn't cite himself as belonging to any particular denomination of Christianity, Martin Luther's revolutionary effects are felt in Kendrick's music wholeheartedly. There's no question that Luther's early use of the printing press to print Bibles in the language of the common person has a direct connection to the ways that Kendrick raps about his own experiences in the common Los Angeles tongue. Revolution through the lens of Protestant Christianity is one of the most prevalent themes throughout Dot's discography, but it's more cryptically in our face now than ever. Mr. Morale gave us its most blunt expression with the Tiffany & Co. crown of diamond thorns and his reminder that he is not our savior. But GNX has offered us a whole new set of layers through which to view this incredible thematic thread which runs through the first moments of Section 80, all the way up through the absolute no-skip banger that's GNX. Before I fall off the path and convince myself to go back and do the whole album in one shot, let's focus up. Luther, Luther, Luther. Kendrick has continuously referenced the great Martin Luther King Jr. over and over throughout his career. Notable mentions are found in High Power, Fuck Your Ethnicity, Ignorance is Bliss, Monster Freestyle, I Am, Backseat Freestyle, and of course the masterpiece that is Mortal Man. Let's not forget that MLK Jr. and Tupac cross themes in Luther too. This means that Martin Luther King Jr. is mentioned on every album, up through to Pimp a Butterfly explicitly. And of course, the thematic presence of MLK Jr. is everywhere all over Damn, but that might be another video too. Martin Luther King Jr. was a quasi-Marxist revolutionary pastor who was named after Martin Luther, the father of Protestant Christianity. Himself a revolutionary, the civil rights movement would forever be indebted to MLK Jr., and so would our great city of LA, where MLK Blvd stood until it was renamed after another critical black man, Barack Obama. I've long argued that Kendrick is something of a socialist, but I think that's better saved for a published paper than a video like this. MLK Jr. is well documented as championing both theological equity as well as democratic socialism, writing in 1952 to his wife, Coretta, "I imagine you already know that I'm much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started out with a noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness." Likewise, he notes in a 1966 speech to his staff that when it comes to civil rights movements generally, we're saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward democratic socialism. I think it's critical to note here that Martin Luther King Jr. didn't accept the fundamental tenets of communism, but was definitely amenable to Marx's general critique of capital. MLK's general rejection of Marx stands, of course, on Marx's rejection of religion itself. Marx famously noted that religion is the opiate of the masses, tending to pacify the proletariat out of action in this world. But as MLK Jr. would note, and Kendrick thusly as one of his successors, in this world, dreams matter when praxis, or the practice of theory, is involved. And religion can be a great motivator for such praxis when wielded by the right charismatic individual. The through line from Martin Luther, father of Protestant Christianity and revolutionary, through Martin Luther King Jr., up through Tupac, and then Kendrick Lamar, is clear as day. K-Dot completes the final bit of the first verse by suggesting that she a fan, he a flop, they just want to kumbaya. Nah. I've seen different takes on the internet that people think that he's talking about SZA as a fan of Kendrick, and Drake as the flop. Likewise, it seems like a lot of people think this is a reference to Not Like Us, with the mantra of he a fan, he a fan, he a fan. But I can't make sense of that in this context. I think it's much more likely a reference to women who are still looking to Drake as he's referenced in Not Like Us. Drake is, of course, the flop. But the real focus here is on how Drake's camp, or the other camp, would really love to come to a compromise in this battle, but Kendrick refuses. After all, he says he wants peace, but he loves war. Evidence for this interpretation can be found elsewhere on the album, such as Kendrick telling listeners that it's better to have one woman right now, and in his back and forth with himself on his inability to stop stoking the fires between him and others. This is another theme that remains prevalent beginning with his earliest tracks, seen through the pinnacle of his fire-stoking control verse, and of course, seeing it cool a bit with To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn, only to top back out after Mr. Morale. Speaking of To Pimp a Butterfly, let's double back to the idea of dreams in the first verse, coupled with the first line of verse 2, where SZA sings, "In this world, concrete flowers grow, heartache only doing what she know." In my opinion, this is a reference to Tupac's poem The Rose That Grew from the Concrete. In this poem, Tupac writes, "Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from the concrete when no one else ever cared. From the perspective of philosophy of poetry, we could discuss just this poem in its own video, and maybe we should, but let's look at it only in the context of this song, and especially through the lens of revolution. Nature's law here is that which is oppressed will stay oppressed. In the case of the rose, it needs light to photosynthesize and grow, but the concrete prevents the sunlight from reaching the seed. Nature requires certain abilities in order for an organism to overcome, and lacking those abilities, the rose grows anyways. This is very reminiscent of the poem Throughout to Pimp a Butterfly, which culminates in Mortal Man, but I digress. This rose grew from the concrete by keeping its dreams, and if this world was Kendrick's, he would multiply the rose's dreams. He'd make it possible for all concrete flowers to grow in his perfect world. There's so much to say about what it might mean for a rose to learn to breathe fresh air, as opposed to come to breathe fresh air, but let's say this before moving on. The next line in Luther is, "Heartache, she only doing what she know." This is obviously a reference to social conditioning and the reiteration of one's environment through their actions, repeating what's happened to them time and time again. And, in the case of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, one might say going through what Kendrick has gone through, including the past life regression that fucked him up on Reincarnation, the beat lifted from Tupac, was Dot learning to breathe fresh air as opposed to recycling the same fucked up, dirty air from his mad city environment. This brings us back to Martin Luther, whose core contribution to Christianity is the idea of predestination, or the fact that God pre-selects those who would be saved and those who would not be. And that predestination would be reiterated in our actions here in this world. If you were going to heaven, you were going to act as though you were going to heaven. Back to theories of revolution. Hegel, the philosophical precursor to Karl Marx, defined human beings in part as simply revolutionary, where nature as such just happens not to be. The human being revolutionizes the status quo of nature. I find it very clear that Tupac had read Hegel up through Marx, especially given his familial background in the Black Panther Party, but that doesn't matter too much. He would have been very familiar with the conceptualizations of man as revolutionary and standing opposed to the ideas of nature. It's a primary aspect of revolutionary theory from the theological and spiritual all the way down to the philosophical, especially as he's well known to have been intimately familiar with Machiavelli's The Prince, where the means justify the ends, a crucial aspect of revolutionary thought at the time. For me, a really incredible picture of the power of Kendrick Lamar is coming to light. Kendrick doesn't have the revolutionary power that people attribute to him. The world, after all, is not his. He doesn't strictly have the power to put the enemies of the people before God and introduce them to judgment. After all, he's not our savior. And neither was Martin Luther, nor Martin Luther King Jr., nor Malcolm X, nor Tupac. These people, like Kendrick, are just the catalysts for change and judgment. They're the voice of the people, that which helps us move against nature. This track is not your standard love song, but a roadmap to praxis, practical application of theory, a seed of revolution. Even the final verse, which is a series of sexual references about being turned on, are actually euphemisms for revolution. Say it loud. Better days are coming for sure. The revolution is here, and you have to represent appropriately. Kendrick is a professional revolutionary, but he's got to settle down and turn it off a bit to turn us on to the idea. In my view, his previous work has been too blatantly revolutionary, and historically, whenever something's been too blatantly revolutionary, it gets dismissed as idyllic and utopian, almost too good to be true. That, or, well, people get assassinated. And this dismissal is exactly what happened with To Pimp a Butterfly and Mr. Morale. But Damn's appeal to the masses musically earned him the Pulitzer Prize for a reason. My main prediction about the post-Morale album was that it would be conceptually perfect, but fed to us through extremely poppy versions of Kendrick tunes. The West Coast anthems that have been regurgitated to us here know no bounds in terms of earworming us, and the earworms are the fundamental basis of revolution. In fact, they always have been. I have a dream. Yes, we can. We gonna be alright. Squabble up. And so I ask you, have you heard the story about us, the people, the roses who grow from the cracks that Kendrick's music makes in the concrete which is held above us by those fake prophets like Drake? No? Now you have. Kendrick might not be our savior, but he, like those who have come before him, is here to send us a message. It's not enough. This isn't just a song, it's a revelation. The revolution won't be televised, so turn that TV off. I know I normally do video game lore, but I really feel like I have something to contribute to this discussion. If you enjoyed this analysis, or even if you hated it, smash that thumbs up or thumbs down, hit that subscribe button, and tell me what you think about Luther, obviously the best track on GNX. If this video gets enough back and forth, I'll do an analysis for every song for the rest of the month, instead of my usual Elden Ring lore. As always, thanks for watching.
Mustard!